Howdy Doody, Buckaroonies, and welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron. In this video, we're here to explore the topic of MPE and talk about what it is, why it's cool, and how to use it inside of Arturia's Pigments and a few other synths to create really cool patches. So what is MPE? MPE stands for MIDI Polyphonic Expression or Multidimensional Polyphonic Expression, depending on who you ask. I guess there's not really a standardized definition of it. But what this means is that we get access to every note in a bit of a different way than we do traditionally. Before we get into the rest of the video, do keep in mind as well, you will need some kind of MPE capable controller in order to do cool MPE stuff, because not every MIDI controller is capable of doing MPE. In my case here today, I will be using this, which is the Sensel Morph, which I think is a really cool, really budget-friendly solution to getting into MPE, as well as just a really nice controller to have around your studio in general, because it has a lot of these different overlays, and it's kind of a cool all-in-one way to just have a controller that does everything. If you haven't seen my video review of the Sensel Morph, feel free to pause this video and go check that out. So what is MPE and what makes it so exciting? If we think of a traditional controller, like a keyboard on a synthesizer, we only have access to a couple of dimensions of expression. We have our velocity, which is how hard we press the notes. We have aftertouch, which is how hard we press the notes after they've been initiated. We have our mod wheel, and we have our pitch bend. Now, the aftertouch is typically monophonic, meaning that if we play a chord and we press down harder on one note, that expression is going to apply to all of those notes. The only polyphonic expression is typically velocity. And the same applies to our pitch bend and our mod wheel. If we apply our mod wheel, it's going to open up whatever the mod wheel is doing across all three of these notes. And the pitch bend does the same thing. If we have a chord and we pitch bend it, that entire chord gets moved up or down. Now, if we take the same idea and apply it to something like my guitar here, and I play out a chord, if I'm playing a chord, my fingers are holding down individual notes, and I can bend each of my fingers individually to apply pitch bend to just that specific note. Beyond that, I can also move them up and down on their position on the fret that they're being played, as well as put in aftertouch by pressing harder on each of these notes. This, in a nutshell, is what MPE offers in a more traditional setup of a synthesizer or keyboard, but the MPE controllers can be any sort of exotic shape or layout that you want them to be, which is a lot of fun to explore. Beyond something like a traditional key bed here, like I have set up on the Morph currently, I could also apply something like this music production overlay, which is also MPE supported, or even the Bucla Thunder overlay, which is a bit more of an exotic controller and is also fully MPE. So it's a lot of fun to play with, but I think one of the hard things about getting into MPE, at least in the early days before other controllers were available, is that they were very exotic and you kind of had to relearn to play an instrument, which I wasn't really a fan of, which is why I picked this up instead. So now that we've laid out all the groundwork and you hopefully understand what MPE means, let's hop into Pigments and check out MPE in action and start building some patches. Here we are with Pigments open, and let's do a quick example of what MPE brings to the table exactly. If I play out a chord here, let's say a C sus2, and I apply a pitch bend, all of those notes get bent at the same time, which is fine, but maybe not exactly what we want. If we go down to the bottom here and enable MPE with the power button, or by clicking the MPE dialog and enabling it there, we get access to MPE instantly, which is pretty straightforward, and that's why I really like Pigments for this kind of stuff. Now, let's say we play that same C sus2 here, and we bend the D up to an E to create a C major. We can get those cool kind of pedal steel licks. This is really the magic of MPE. You can see if I play out a chord, I can bend each of these notes individually without affecting the others. MPE goes well beyond this though, because we can assign the pitch bend as well as the y-axis, or the position on the keys vertically, as well as our aftertouch or Z or pressure to individual expressions that happen per note. Pigments makes MPE pretty straightforward. Once we have it enabled, we have our aftertouch, which is going to be our Z-axis, our keyboard, which is going to be the X-axis, and the macro 1, which is going to be the Y-axis. To assign this to stuff, let's take the aftertouch here. We'll assign this to, let's do the unison voices. We'll change this to a chord and change that chord to a fifth. We'll leave the keyboard on the pitch bend for now, because for some reason in Pigments, there's no way, at least that I've found, to zero out the X-axis for pitch, so we can't freely assign it, which is a shame. So we'll just leave that as it is. Now we'll go over to macro 1, which is going to represent our Y-axis, and let's move this to be the filter cutoff. For a bit of added fun, let's also use the Y-axis to move the wavetable position, and then go back to our aftertouch or the Z-axis and add that to modulate the position as well. Now that we've got our patch set up, up, let's hop over and add some quick effects. Let's just bring in the default delay, maybe with a bit more feedback and some stereo spread, as well as just a touch of reverb because everything sounds better with reverb. Now that we've got all that set up here, let's hop into our MPE menu here and change our slide mode to be relative unipolar. That way we're not going to go below this cutoff point. Now let's give that chord a play once more and move our fingers around on the X, Y, and Z axis on a per note basis to hear what MPE can bring to the table. As you can probably tell, this is what makes MPE so exciting and fun, is it opens up a more traditional instrument and a very bland synth patch in a really cool way that feels a little more alive and like you're really connecting with an instrument rather than just pulling sound out of a synthesizer by plunking along on a keyboard. Because Pigments is pretty deep, we can also combine this with a lot of other expressions. So we could use our aftertouch to introduce some phase modulation. We could use the macro to do some frequency modulation as well as some wave folding maybe, and just about anything in between. So we can take, again, a very simple patch and we'll keep an eye on this waveform and really move it along without much effort. Another cool example of some MPE fun I've cooked up here is inside of UVI Falcon, and I'll probably do a separate video on how to configure this because it's just a little bit different. But I've got a standard granular patch here, and what's fun is because Falcon is more modular in nature, I can actually use the X-axis to control the granular engine's position, which is a lot of fun. Then I assigned the Z and Y axes to some different stuff like the filter cutoff, the variation in the position, jitter, density, and size of the grains as well, which is really, really cool stuff. So let's explore this for a minute. It's not a YouTube production tutorial without talking about Serum, so I've got that open here, and it's pretty straightforward to create an MPE patch. We'll go into the menu, enable MPE down here, and then you can set X, Y, and Z to macro 1, 2, and 3. In my case, I did Y and Z to macro 1 and 2, and left the pitch bend range up to 48. This is a lot of fun. I've used this to target the filter, wavetable, FM, and some other stuff, and created a really cool kind of sci-fi explosion growling sound. I don't really know, but it sounds like this. Finally, one last really cool MPE synth I wanted to mention is Surge, which is absolutely free, and I've made a little patch here using a wavetable and some FM, and it sounds like this. And there you have it, a very brief look at MPE, what it is, what it does, and why it's cool, as well as some patch ideas that hopefully inspire you to get out and make some crazy, wacky, expressive patches of your own. I think at this point it's fair to say we're really on the verge of MPE being adopted as a mainstream thing. There are a lot of virtual instruments that support it or are starting to support it, and there are even some hardware synths that either support it natively or are starting to support it with firmware updates with things like the Hydrosynth or the upcoming Expressive E Osmos, which is really exciting stuff. If you're interested in more MPE related stuff, I've also linked a list down below from the people over at Roly, which has a pretty comprehensive guide to virtual instruments, hardware synths, and controllers that all support MPE. And I think that concludes our time here today, so I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you maybe have a suggestion for another MPE related video in the future, let me know down in the comments, and yeah, that does it. Bye-bye.